You're listening to In Sickness, a podcast about caregiving with Allison Breininger and Justin Bima. Good morning, Allison.
Hey, Justin. So a lot has happened in your life since last time we talked.
Yeah.
Because last time we were here together officially, you were telling us that Sarah was about to have surgery and all of that. And then because of that and because of stuff in my life, we have taken a little tiny hiatus. So it's been a while.
Yeah.
So tell us how did it go? How you doing? Where are you now? All that good stuff.
Yeah, sure. So she had the surgery.
Okay.
Surgery went well. There were some pretty dramatic photos of the cyst being removed. I think Sarah showed you those, and they are.
I cannot erase that from my brain. It blew my mind.
Yeah.
That was inside of her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, the surgery went well. It was all the pathology came back clear, so no cancer.
Fantastic.
And so now it's just healing.
Yeah.
Which is so far going really well. She's walking a fair bit, pretty much back to what she was walking before surgery.
Wow.
So that's pretty incredible. We're, 2 weeks post-surgery-ish, I think.
What was it, the 28th?
28th of May. So maybe we're, I don't know.
So almost 3 weeks.
Almost 3 weeks. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's really great.
Yeah.
The hospital stay was an interesting experience.
Mm-hmm.
Time is a funny thing in the hospital.
It's true.
As far as
it?
What day is it? What time is it? It felt like we were there forever, but also not really there that long at all. And it's just this weird pause, which was something interesting to experience.
Yeah.
Having that not be part of our experience thus far.
Yeah.
But things are going well. We went down to Seattle last week to get her staples taken out.
Okay.
And they were pleased with how things are going, healing wise, and with what she's able to do so far. So we're just keeping going on this recovery train.
Wow. I'm so glad that everything went as well as it could go.
Mm-hmm.
And that the results were negative, which is good, and all of that. So how are you as caregiver feeling 3 weeks out from this? Because also I know that the build up to it was a lot, just even your nervous system. So how's your nervous system at this point?
It's doing all right, I will say. There was certainly going into it, it was so much unknown as far as what's this experience going to be like. How's recovery going to be? Worried about an enormous crash afterwards. And so not having experienced those extreme results or things post-surgery, it's been good. Certainly for the first week or so, there was a lot more. She was pretty laid up and not able to do a lot. So there was certainly more I was doing, but I think I was bracing myself for a lot more intense post-surgery caregiving for a lot longer.
Okay. Sure.
Happy with the direction things are going.
And you basically worked. I mean, you obviously took off for the hospital days.
Yeah.
But I was blown away that basically as soon as you got back, you were back at work. Was that how did that feel? Was that helpful? Was it a good distraction, or was it I wish I wasn't doing this? Or
yeah. So the surgery was on a Tuesday. Did I work that Monday? I don't remember. I think I probably did. And so I took off Tuesday when we went down for surgery. No, I did take that Monday off, I think. Anyway, that doesn't matter. We went down on Tuesday for the surgery. We were in the hospital Tuesday night, Wednesday night, came back Thursday. And then Friday morning, I did work for a little over half the day. And it felt going prior to this, that's kind of what I had said I was going to do to my boss is I'm planning on being in Friday. And so I felt like I kind of should at least show up. But it was good. It was mostly, okay, what did I miss while I was out?
Sure.
And kind of clearing the deck a little bit to kind of get a head start for the following Monday.
Yeah.
And certainly, I think it got to 1 PM and I was like, I'm kind of done.
Yeah.
And so I took a short day.
Yeah.
But
because you're 100% remote these days.
At this point right now,
yes,
I am. Yeah.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Yeah. I find, and I think you and I were talking about this during that season is, and sometimes I don't know, like sometimes when I'm just like so tired and so in it, doing something like working, right? Or like thinking, like getting into my thinking brain can actually really help. And then other times it's like absolutely not. And same thing, even like with like leaving the house or like going out with a friend, or it's like, you just never know. Like, is that going to be helpful, or is that going to, and so sometimes it's tricky, but I think that I find that as well, that like sometimes just like getting into my thinking brain and it's almost like taking off this caregiving hat.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, obviously we never fully take it off, but like putting on a different hat for a minute and being like, oh, I'm going to use this part of my brain can sometimes be a little bit, at least for me, energizing and distracting.
Yeah. And also it's a realm in which you have kind of control over, not over everything, but I mean, you have so much more control over what you're doing and the outcomes and all of that. Whereas when you're caregiving, it's like so much is out of your hands.
Yep.
And so it's great to shift into a sphere in which things are more predictable. Things are more, you have, a little bit more what to expect and can influence the results. Yeah.
Well said. I think, I mean, we talk about that when people talk about like working while caregiving in general, like, and there are benefits to continuing to work. And I think that those are some of them. And it's also really hard.
Yeah. For sure.
But yeah, there are benefits as well. Oh, I'm so glad that you're on this side of it.
It's great. Yeah.
That she's doing as well as she's doing, that you're doing as well as you're doing. And big sigh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So that's kind of a real quick summary of how we're doing over here. What's been going on with the Briningers since we last talked?
What hasn't been going on with the Briningers? So we also have had a pretty eventful few weeks. So on May 20th, Sean had surgery to remove some cancer from his gums.
Right.
And while they were in there, they found more cancer. And so they ended up removing 2 different chunks of his gums. So that was a little bit of a mess with your head, like to wake up and be like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And then the recovery for that has been absolutely awful. So it's almost been a month. I guess it'll be a month tomorrow. And he's still on pain meds.
Oh.
Which nobody expected.
Right.
So it turned into a really pretty awful bit of time because he was in excruciating pain and then was not able to, really talk very much because it's in your mouth. I mean, that's the thing you don't think about is like your mouth.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? Drinking, eating was all very challenging. And so then we were just trying to figure out like, why? And is something wrong? Or is it just because they were like took these really big chunks? And so ended up after a while, like we brought him in. I was just like talking to medical people like every day, on the phone, brought him in. And the day we brought him in, I was the one that said, hey, as long as we're here having you look at his mouth, can you also check his labs?
Right.
Just to see if there's something else going on here that's making this recovery so hard. And it was this pretty terrible, like we could do a whole series just on this. But it was like, we left the clinic, we got the labs, we left the clinic, we were sitting my mom had gotten the car. We, side note, very proud of myself that I was in such a rough spot that I asked my mom to come with us to the clinic.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So proud of myself for that. So she had gotten the car and he and I were sitting waiting for the prescription. And then ding, little my chart message that says like your labs are back. And I looked and his kidney numbers were like off the charts, terrible. And his kidneys are always, it's kind of funny. We don't talk much about his kidneys because there's so many other body parts that are struggling.
Yeah.
But he's in like stage, it depends on the day, like 3-4 kidney failure. And so we're always watching his kidney numbers. And they're sort of like stably awful. But on this day, they were like off the charts awful. And so then fortunately the nurse had given me her phone number, which she'll probably regret later. But I was like, here's the deal. We're still in the building. Here's the number. What do you think? So she's like, don't leave yet.
Yeah.
So then she calls back a minute later and is like, I'm really sorry, but you have to go to the hospital. And I just like broke down right there in the lobby of the clinic. I was like, I don't want to go to the hospital, And it was like one of these, like part of my brain going into that appointment thought, there's a chance they might take one look at this guy and be like, yeah, you're going across the street. But I like didn't let myself like pack anything because
right.
I was like, nope, we're not going with that mindset. But then there we were without like a phone charger and without the, you know what I mean? So anyway, he ended up being in the ER for like 36 hours.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Like he was like technically like admitted to the hospital, but they never like had a room.
Right. Yeah.
So it's just like a whole thing that we did not expect from this minor surgery. And so I think we even talked about this. It's like when you have a surgery and it's like minor.
Yeah.
You know, like and I think that that's what really like threw me off of this whole thing is that I was not prepared for this.
Right.
Since then, like the pain has gotten better. He's still on some pain meds. He's back to being able to eat. His kidneys are still a little wonky. And now he's got some new, like his hemoglobin's really low. So something's off. And it's a tricky thing because it's like everybody's like, that's not my body part. That's not my body part, you know. And I'm finding that it's summer. And so I was like trying to get a hold of people on Friday. And I was like, you're not going to get back to me, are you? And then they didn't. And so anyway, we're in a weird place of like some weird's going on.
That's yeah.
And then we did decide not to go to Montreal. I know we've talked a lot about that trip on this podcast. So there was one day that he went to the garden store with me.
Yeah.
And after like 5 minutes, he's like, I have to go to the car. And then that night he's like, I can't go to Montreal.
Yeah.
So fortunately, like our daughter wasn't actually that excited about Montreal anyway. So she very sweetly tried to look sad about the cancellation, but was clearly gleeful. But it feels like it's a morning kind of like, you know, it's not like we all were like, we're not going to Montreal because we'd rather blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, we're not going to Montreal because he can't walk in a city. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so it has been rough. But in the middle of all that, then our daughter graduated from high school.
Right.
That again could be a whole episode of just like him in this giant auditorium thing and the walking he had to do. And there was a time when I was like almost trying to find security to get a wheelchair. I was like, oh yeah, goodness. And we had a graduation party, which was great, but like super exhausting.
Yeah.
I threw this caregiver conference, which was like amazing. It's so fantastic. And some of you listeners were there and it was amazing to meet you. But anyway, like each one of those things could have been enough for like one human for like 6 months, but all of them happened to me in like 3 weeks.
It's a lot for 3 weeks. It's so much.
It's so much. So today I feel all right.
Okay.
But you know, I haven't seen Sean yet this morning, so who knows what the day will bring.
Right.
So for our conversation today, I was thinking about there's this guy who does all these like surveys. He kind of works for this company. Anyway, he like interviews me sometimes about caregiving stuff. Yeah. And I'm happy to just like talk, you know, he's just like doing crowd research kind of thing.
Right.
So a couple weeks before this last hard bit, he said he had done a survey with me and he said on a scale of 0 to 7. Okay. On your best day, when you're feeling great, what number are you at caregiving? Like, what's your scale of like how good you are as a caregiver?
Okay. That's
0 to 7. Right. Okay. And I said, without skipping a beat, I said 10. And he kind of paused and then he was like, oh, you're joking. And I was like, well, I mean, kind of. Right. So then he said, you know, when you're having a bad day, what number are you at caregiving? Yeah. And really, if I'm going to be honest, I kind of wanted to say 7 because I wanted to be like, look, this is something that I like do and I'm good at and I like put all of myself into, even on a bad day. Yeah. Like, but I was trying to be a little humble. So I said 5. Okay. So I was thinking later, like, what was he trying to get at? And I think he was trying to get at like, how does, when caregivers are burnt out or tired or whatever, how does that impact their level of caregiving? And I thought, well, I'm good at this no matter what. Like, I don't let my bad days get in the way. But then shortly thereafter, we had this terrible season where it was like this pretty like round the clock caregiving that I was doing in a really intense way of like medicine every 3 hours. And then he was on so much pain medicine that they were like, well, you should be checking his oxygen and have your like Narcan ready because if he passes out, I was like, what? So I'm like checking his oxygen in the middle of the night. I mean, it was like off the charts, intense and unexpectedly intense. I was done. I was just like, reached a new level of exhaustion. And I was like, where's the adrenaline? Usually the adrenaline sweeps me up and is like, here we go. we got this.
Yeah.
And it was just like, my adrenaline had been like, you know what? We've been working hard for 13 years and we are done. Which fair,
Yeah.
right? But I was like, I was like tired in a new level.
Yeah.
And there was a day that I was just like lying on the couch for a minute because I was so tired. And I thought I should be checking the clock to see, is it time for the next round of pain meds? And I thought, I'm too tired to even look at the clock. And then I thought, this is what the guy was trying to get at.
Yeah, right.
Is that if I'm so burnt out that I might not do my caregiving stuff as well.
Right.
Right. But then it feels like this terrible catch-22 because I'm so tired from the caregiving that then I might miss something or not be as effective as a caregiver. But then he gets worse and then I have more caregiving. And it just feels like this terrible, unfair tsunami.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm going to pause there. Of course,
Okay.
I have more thoughts on this, but I'm going to pause there for a second and just get your initial thoughts and reactions on this whole thing.
Yeah. I think there really is that, like you said, that catch-22 where caregiving is a thing that is exhausting. When we're exhausted, we don't have the capacity to do the things in our life as well, regardless of what that is, in this case, caregiving. And then if we are not able to do that role as good as possible, then is that going to cause the condition of our person to go down because they're not getting the care? Then they need more care.
Right.
We get more tired. And it's like, I can see how that would spin out of control or feel like that, like you're on that path. And I certainly can relate to, when the really hard years when Sarah was, really not doing well, being so exhausted that like feeling like it's this role, like I just can't do it. And then feeling like, well, I'm not doing it well, like feeling guilty.
Yeah.
That, I'm not the sick one. And so why can't I have the energy and motivation or whatever it is to get off the couch and do what I need to do? And I don't know what the answer is. Maybe we'll I don't know that we'll come up with an answer today, but I think we'll kind of pull some strings out of this, figure out some thoughts. But yeah, it's a difficult spot to feel like you're in. Yeah. And I can see how that could be really feel hopeless.
Yeah.
Feel overwhelming, feel like you're in this thing that you can't climb out of.
Yeah. Well, even when you said a second ago, you had these feelings of, I just can't do this.
Right.
And I feel like I had some of those in these last weeks. And I don't know where my superhero cape from the last 13 years, because certainly I've had some moments like that, but this felt new and different for some reason. And there were absolutely moments of like, I just can't do this. And there was a time at one point where I was like, oh man, like he had a fever. I don't know. Something happened in before the ER thing.
Yeah.
Where I thought, oh my gosh, is he going to need to go to the ER? And I thought, I don't think I can do it. Like, I don't think I can physically like drive him there.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think I can physically be there. And it was terrifying.
Right.
Because it was sort of like, well, Brian, you have to.
Right.
You have to. And fortunately, like I got people around. So I could be like, hey, mom, hey, friend, hey, whatever. But that's kind of not the point. So it was this like, it was like sort of this hopeless, but it was also like really scary. Like you can't just not. You can't.
Yeah.
And like at one point I was talking to a good friend of mine who was very wise. And I was just telling her, like, I was being really honest about like, I am toast over here. And she said at one point, I wonder if maybe it would make sense for him to go into the hospital just so that you can have respite. But then I was like, that I would be there.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's not like I would drop him off and be like, bye, I'm going to go take a nap. Right. Like,
yeah.
But it was a really sort of eye-opening when she said that. I was like, whoa. To have that sort of outside perspective of like,
right.
I am so tired that maybe I need to have somebody else come. Like maybe it'd be better for him to be in the hospital. Not like she was saying like, oh, Allison, you're not doing a good job and you need professionals. It was more like she was like, I've never heard you this tired. And I think that you maybe need the respite. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I was like, oh, that's wow.
Yeah.
So it felt like exhausting, but then also a little scary to look at it from the outside, to be like, I don't like this feeling.
No.
I like it when I'm a superhero and I'm just like, I'm doing all the things and I can keep doing it. You know what I mean? Didn't like it.
No.
0 stars.
It's interesting you mentioned the respite piece.
Yeah.
Because as we were thinking about this topic, you had mentioned that there are these studies that show that when caregivers are well supported or better supported, like ER visits go down, like hospital stays decrease, there's better outcomes, and just all of these, it just is a better overall thing. And you look at that, and like that logically makes sense, right?
Sure, right.
Because you're preventing this spiral that we were just talking about, because you're propping up the caregiver, or there's more community around that to share that load. But one of the things in that article that I was reading about, one of those studies, is and I think this was focused on spousal caregiving for people like over 65, specifically where one had dementia.
Okay. Which is actually like they have found one of the hardest communities.
Right.
I've known. But yeah, go ahead.
And it brought up the fact that there's a perception, it sounded like there was a perception from the medical community that often the caregivers would bring their person to the ER because they needed respite.
Oh.
And I thought about that, and I didn't like that that's the perception that they had. That felt weird. And while at the same time, I can understand like where that would come from as a caregiver in an overwhelming situation, because it speaks to the level of care you're providing.
Yeah.
That the alternative is like a hospital.
Yeah.
Or an emergency room.
Right.
Right? Like it's not like you can have, your friend come over and sit with them for an hour a day, 2 days, whatever it is. Like you need medical intervention or medical staff to be there.
Right.
Like that's intense. But also like no one likes going to the ER.
Right.
Like that feels like a last resort. And so I don't know what you think about that kind of thread.
I mean, it feels kind of gross because it feels a little bit like the medical providers are thinking that the caregivers are being kind of selfish. Like you're just dropping them off here with us because you're tired. And like you said, like that is the last place on earth that I want to go.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm there. Like I can't imagine these spouses in this study bring them to the ER and then leave.
Yeah.
And so, it's not like it's a restful. I mean, yes, there are other people who might then do like the toileting needs and the whatever, right? So that part is taken care of. But I mean, it's a terrible, terrible, terrible place.
Yeah.
And so it feels that feels a little like ugh to me, to be like, are the medical providers just be like, oh, well, caregivers just bring them to us because they need some rest, and maybe that's not the tone.
Yeah.
But it brings up this little like guilty sort of thing. And even those studies, every time I see those studies that are like, oh, when the caregiver is supported, then ER visits go down, right? And it makes me feel guilty. So I had like a whole moment of guilt around this.
Yeah, right.
This time that just happened because his kidney numbers were terrible because he was so dehydrated. And, he had basically just been like sleeping a lot because he was on so many pain meds and because he was in so much pain that he would wake up and I'd be like, drink this Boost, drink it. And he'd be like, I can't drink it, And so of course he was dehydrated.
Yeah.
But then there was part of me that was like, this was my fault. No, I was not in my good thinking brain. Right. But there was absolutely a part of me that was like, we are here because it's my fault, because I should have made him drink more. I should have made him eat more. I should have woken him up every hour and given him a glass of water, And so then I had all this guilt around like, I was so tired, but I could have done more. And if I had done more, then we wouldn't be in this stupid place, And so it's like when you see those numbers of like, well, when the caregiver is doing better, then the ER visits go down. It's sort of like, well, I don't know. It's like brings up this like kind of guilt kind of thing.
Yeah.
For me, because it's those studies. I mean, it depends. Like some of them have the twist of when we as a community do a better job of supporting caregivers than XYZ. But I feel like we caregivers who are often like guilt over or guilt leaning towards guilt.
Yeah.
Anyway, see that it's very rarely that I read. I read more like when you don't do your job well, that means because the inverse, that's what the inverse of that is, right? If a caregiver's not doing well, the hospitalizations go up. So I don't know if I'm making a point. I'm just saying that like those things make me feel a little triggered.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one important thing to remember when you're talking about this guilt, like, should I have done more to prevent this ER stay, or the threat of these studies that, you know, these caregivers are unsupported or whatever. I think we need to remember that it's a systemic problem.
Yeah.
Not an individual problem.
Yeah.
Like it's not us. It's that the way we have currently structured healthcare and the need for family unpaid caregivers at home, like that creates this impossible bind that these caregivers are put in. And so it's not that you're not doing your job well. It's that the deck is kind of stacked against you.
Right.
And not to be all doom and gloom, but like just to give yourself a little bit of a break on that guilt that, you know, you get into the hospital and hospitals are trying to get you out the door as quick as possible and have pushed so many more tasks that used to be done, you know, in the hospital with longer stays onto you as a person.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it makes sense that it just feels so overwhelming, all of this stuff that you have to do. And that as a result of that, you get to this place where it's like, I'm just too tired to keep going. Yeah.
And I think you're right that it's good to zoom out and realize like the system is broken. The system's broken for him. The system is certainly broken for me. I mean, it doesn't even exist.
Yeah.
Right. There is no system.
Right.
That's the problem. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think it does help to like the deck is stacked against us going into this.
Yeah.
And I realize I am saying this from a place where I have like my mom 5 minutes away who would be here in a heartbeat. Like she was like there with us that day. She was, I said, Mom, I need your support. I need you to come to this clinic appointment with us. She came to the ER with us. She, you know what I mean? Like, and I've got like a billion friends that would step up at any moment. And I'm still like burnt to a crisp.
Right.
Right. I have financial resources. I speak English. Like, you know, I am like the best like resourced of possible. And it's still so hard. Yeah. Right. And so the deck is still stacked against me, but I just imagine like how stacked it is against other people. I mean, because he's a cancer guy, like always gets a room at the ER. Oh, okay. But there are all these people on gurneys in the hallway.
Yeah.
I mean, my goodness. But the flip side of this that I had to keep reminding myself is the only reason we knew that his kidneys were in such bad shape is because I said,
right.
Can you order some labs?
Right.
Because I saw the chart immediately and I reached out to the nurse who reached out to the doctor who said, here's what you need to do. We were only at the clinic at all because I said, I think we need to come in.
Yeah.
And I realized too that like a lot of these things wouldn't have happened if like that nurse coordinator within this chunk of time had given me her cell phone number, which she probably regrets now. And it was because of that, because I could just text her and say, hey, could you add labs on? Because if I had to go through the whole like system to make that happen, I probably would have been like, oh, too much work.
Yeah.
But so it's just like I had to tell myself the only reason we're here anyway, the only reason we even know to be here is because of good things that I did. Right. And so I was trying to like balance that out with the guilt of like, you should have given him more water, you know, and even he is like, look, you tried.
Yeah.
But I think I don't know. It's such a headspace thing because even in that moment when we were in the clinic before we knew about the kidneys, his heart rate was really eye, which showed that he was dehydrated. So this nurse was trying to be like super helpful. So she was like, let's get him some fluids instead of you going to the whatever infusion clinic. She's like, don't freak out, but I'm going to call like an alert, so the rapid response team would come.
Oh, okay.
She's like, it's not like he's having an emergency. She's like, it just means they're going to come faster.
Yeah.
So this like dude like came running in and she's like, he needs fluids. And he's like, okay, great. But then someone told us later, oh, the fluids they gave him were not the kind of fluids they should give to someone who has kidney problems. And then I'm like, what? So Winston is very upset about that. Winston's like, why would they do that? I know Winston. So it feels like that kind of thing too. Like, I should have known. I should have known there's a different kind of fluids. Right. I should have said, so I don't know. It's just holding this like I am doing superhuman things and it still feels like it's not enough. And so I have to like give myself the grace of like, yes, and you're doing these things. And there's no amount of anything that you could be doing that would still prevent all of the hard thing. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And I was going to ask, and then you kind of answered the question, like, how did it feel to be the one that decided, hey, we should do labs, and to be the one to catch that or see that that was something that should be done? Because I could see, one, you could be like, okay, I am important here. I'm doing stuff, like I am doing a good job by needing to do that. And I could see the other side of like, I can't believe like they're not doing their jobs to where I have to be the backstop to like catch these things that go through. And yeah, it's unfortunate that often we have to be that. Yeah. And our person is our whole world. They're seeing dozens of people a day. They have, so we don't have someone that's dedicated full focus on our person. Right. But it just feels like we should be able to expect more than sometimes what we get.
Right. Well, and I think, so to answer your question, it's both. Yeah. Like I both feel sort of like righteous, sort of like, well, like I'm the one that asked for these labs, but then also like, well, crap. What if there's a different day that I don't think to ask for labs and nobody else is thinking about this? Yep. So it feels like I'm, what was that show? House. Yeah. Like I'm like the house, like I'm the one here trying to put together the puzzle pieces. And each of them, especially like when there's multiple systems going on, each of them only looks at their body part.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's a true, like ENT would never order labs because that's not their thing.
Right.
They just want to look in your mouth.
Right.
But I'm like, no, he's got other parts of him.
Yeah.
And so it feels both affirming.
Yeah.
And also terrifying.
Yeah.
Because what if I had been so tired that I hadn't even thought to order the labs? Right. And then I missed it.
Yeah.
Which I shouldn't even have to think of because I'm just, quote, just the wife.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it's just this like cycle of like, ugh. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to go jump back to those studies that we were talking about a minute ago.
Yeah, sure.
Just because I have a pet peeve about them that I want to air my grievance on that.
Please do. Love it. Hear it.
So you had mentioned these studies that they exist, and I was like, oh, well, I'm going to go look some of those up, and I did. Sure. And inevitably, they came down to cost. It was like when caregivers are well supported, yes, ER visits and these things go down, and that saves Medicare money.
Yeah.
And it does not feel good.
Nope.
To have the health of our person converted into dollars.
Oh, for sure.
And feel like that's the only way that's going to create change.
Yep.
Is by putting it in financial terms.
Yep.
And the fact that that's the state of the world that we live in just does not feel good.
Nope.
And I do not like that.
Nope.
So.
No, I mean, because through the negative space, a big part of the things I'm trying to do is systemic change.
Yeah.
And so I sort of have these 3 bullet points that I have in my pocket.
Right.
That are sort of like dependent on the size of the heart of the person I'm talking to.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So like if it's a big hearted person, I might say, we need to make these changes because caregivers are humans.
Right.
And they deserve support. And right. Great. That works for some people. Medium-sized heart is, you're picturing the Grinch. Medium-sized heart is when a caregiver is well cared for, then the patient has better outcomes.
Right. Yep.
Which I sort of hate that for caregivers, because caregivers, I just want to be like, you deserve it. Right.
Yep,
but some people,
100%.
they need to hear that. Tiny heart is when caregivers are more supported, the system saves money.
Right.
So I sort of have all three, because all three are true.
Right.
But I sort of have all three cards ready, because it depends on the listener and what's going to actually like impact them.
What's going to move the needle.
Which is gross.
Yeah.
Hate it.
Yeah.
Hate it. But it's like, well, whatever's going to work. Whatever's going to move the needle, like it's what the card we have to play. Well, can you go back? Have you grieved or aired enough grievances around that, or do you want to talk about it?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I just wanted to.
No, I'm glad you said it, but I wish it didn't exist. Yes. Can you go back? You were telling me a little bit about one of the surveys you found talked about caregivers being sad. Can you pull that up? Do you have that handy?
Yeah. You want me to read that little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's different. I mean, to me, that feels different than being like, oh, caregivers are tired.
Yeah.
It's like they're sad, and then their sadness, I think, is what you had said. So yeah, tell me more about that one.
Yeah. It's going to take me. Why can't I find that piece?
Just Google caregiver sad. See what happens.
Well, one, I think that sad is a funny, it's an odd descriptor to feel like is in a survey, because it's
not objective.
Right. But anyway, so what it says here is patients with fatigued or sad caregivers also had higher Medicare costs in the same time period. $1,900 more if caregivers scored high for fatigue, and $1,300 more if the caregiver scored high for sadness, even after all other factors were taken into account. So it's like, again, it's putting it into dollars, but it's like, it's not just being emotional, or not just being physically strained from this role, but the emotional toll as well has an impact on how well we are, which then impacts the care we can give, what we have to give.
I mean, I think in a weird way, I'm glad maybe that they called that out, because I think it's really true. And I think something I'm reflecting on is that I think a part of why this last thing was so hard is I think I started to move into some grief. I think that we are starting to see that, he's had surgery upon surgery upon surgery, and that he is less able to bounce back from these surgeries. And my brain started to go to like, how many of these surgeries, like, do we need to start making decisions around, like, instead of just being like, sure, all the time. Because again, the different body part doctors are like, it's just little, just take it out. But they don't realize that like 3 days later, a different dude is like, it's just little, take it out of this part. And so I think that grief, like, because at one point, my wise friend that I was talking to, the one who said about respite, was like, it sounds like you're grieving. Because at one point I was like, do I have the flu?
Yeah.
But then like somebody came over or something else, and I was like, oh, I feel better. And I was like, okay, so clearly I don't have the flu. And I think that my body had started to go into like a pretty deep anticipatory grief around, like, we thought this was going to be a little surgery. It was not.
Yeah.
Like, what does this say about the future? What, and so, and I think let's just throw in there that in the midst of all that, like, our daughter was graduating. So there's like grief there too. And there was this whole thing, like, we're in the ER, and then she's like texting like, hey, by the way, I'm going to like senior night. And I'm like, what the heck is senior night? And am I supposed to be there? Do you need a parent?
Right.
Are we like ruining everything? Because we're not, you know what I mean? Like, so I had this whole moment of like, okay, she went into kindergarten with her dad having a bone marrow transplant.
Right.
And she's graduating from high school with her dad in the ER. Like, what the actual heck? Right.
Yeah.
So I think that like grief, like, whoosh, like monsooned over me.
Right.
And so that sadness. So, and then, like, and grief begets fatigue. Right.
Yeah,
and so I think that, anyway, I'm just saying that I guess I'm glad in a way that they called out that like, when you're sad, everything's harder, And so, and there's a lot of reasons to be sad when you're a caregiver. And there's a lot of reasons to be tired. And when you're tired and you're sad, everything's harder.
Yeah.
But I think then my brain goes to like, So it's harder. So then you're not as good at it. And then he doesn't do as well. And then it costs money. And then, right. And then around and around the wheel goes.
Yeah. You're back in that spiral.
Yeah.
And so.
Which makes me sad and tired.
Right. And so not that we need to, or I think are able to.
You're not going to solve this, Justin?
Come up with a solution or find a like nice way to wrap this up.
I hope that you would.
With some like hopeful message. But it also, I don't like leaving things or leaving our listeners just like there's this hopeless spiral.
Right. Goodbye. See you next time.
See you next week. But yeah, I'm struggling with what else to say to kind of, I don't know. I think that as we mentioned, it's important to remember the systemic issues at play.
Yep.
That it's not a reflection on your ability as a caregiver.
Yep.
I think that is an important thing to remember. I think as you talk about, and we've talked about a lot, you're framing this as not, I need to take care of myself better in these moments. I need support in these moments so that I can take better care of my person. You need that because you deserve it as a human.
Yep.
You deserve to be supported. You deserve to be cared for. You deserve to all of those things.
Yep.
So I think that's another important thing to remember. I think for me, and this may not be true for all situations, depending on the type of illness that a person you're caring for has. But for me and where I'm at now, remembering that I have been in those places where things felt spiraling out of control. And I have had moments where that is not the case.
Yeah.
And so, and I think about this with how I navigate my depression as well.
Yeah.
Like there are times where I have been deeply in that. And there are times where I'm not.
Yeah.
And so when I feel in those spirals, in those dark places, being able to hold on to the fact that things have not always been that way and things aren't always going to be that way.
Yep.
And that's, that may be a really hard thing to see. Or it may not feel like that's possible. But I think just, remembering that these situations are dynamic and how we feel ebbs and flows.
Yep.
And not to let yourself get stuck in that place, maybe. Is that?
Yeah, I appreciate the use of the word dynamic, because at first I was thinking temporary, but I was like, temporary doesn't hit it, but dynamic does. And I think that's such an important thing because 3 weeks ago, I was like, I get a little extreme that I'm like, I will be tired for the rest of my life.
Yeah. But it can feel that way.
Like that,
yes,
right?
That's a real thing.
And so, and I remember like a couple of years ago when I had that big old meltdown, my wise friend saying, I was like, I will never not be tired. And she's like, that's not true. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
And so, I would have never thought that like 3 weeks later, I'd be like, da-da-da, here I am. Right. And so I think that remembering like that, I love that word dynamic, that these situations are dynamic. It's not going to feel like this forever.
Yeah.
And even if you're in it deep and there's no end in sight, there are going to be moments where it's not going to feel like this. Right. And so I think that to me, that feels helpful. I think another thing about this conversation is, even though there's no solutions, unfortunately, like just to validate, like, yeah, you're probably sad. Yeah, you're probably tired. Yeah, that makes it all harder. And yeah, you're doing your best.
Right.
And most of us are not medically trained. And so if you don't know that this should happen, or this or whatever, or because you're tired, or because you're not a medical professional and your person needs to go to the ER or the hospital or whatever, it's not like you messed up.
Right. It's not a shortcoming on your part.
Right. You're already doing like above and beyond like all the things. And think about if you didn't exist, what would be happening? Yeah. Right. So I think part of this conversation is just like to validate, like, this is hard and the system is stacked against us.
Right.
I will just say a couple of things that I did that was like, did sort of support. Like I said, one thing was like, I brought my mom along and didn't even say to Sean, like, is this okay? I just was like, I need my mom. I need her to come to this appointment with us. I need her to drive. Like I was so tired that I was like, I need her to drive. When we were in the ER, I got to a point where I was like, I just got to go home and go to bed. I delegated some things. Like it was the night before our daughter's last day of high school.
Oh, wow.
And I texted a friend of mine and I was like, do you have any capacity to like put something on her car or the yard or like something? And she was like, what are the school colors? I'm on it. You know, and so she just like did that instead of me being like, I don't know, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, some of those things that we just need to like to in those moments be like, you're not superhuman. You're like, you are an actual human,
right?
And you need rest, and it's okay to say that.
Yep.
You know? Yeah. So speaking of that, what are the ways that our friends can show up for us in these moments? I think I just named a couple.
Yeah, I think you did. I think that one thing is don't wait until these times to show up.
Yeah.
Help the caregiver feel supported in the easier times and the harder times.
Yep.
Because on the one hand, like asking for help is hard.
Yep.
We've talked about that. And it's hard to do something that feels it's like such a big leap when you're in such a low place. Like you don't have the energy for it. It feels like emotionally too much maybe. And so the more you can show them that you will show up, respond to their requests in the easier times, gives them less friction to ask for help in those harder times. So I think that paying a lot of attention to that and think about what moments you show up and provide support. And if it's just in the crises, think about how you can expand that. So I think that's one thing. I think another thing is if you're talking to a caregiver you're supporting and they are in these moments, listen and validate. Be very careful, I think, about just think about what you're saying and if it's going to feed into it or not.
Feed into the guilt, feed into the exhaustion, feed into all of it.
Yes. And also don't brightside them in this moment because validate that this is a real thing, the real place that they are. You know, I don't know how it would have felt for you're in this exhausted place and you're talking to someone and they're like, well, at least you knew to get those labs.
Right.
And it's like, well, yeah, but also there's a lot of other stuff emotionally and physically going on.
Or if anyone would have said like, oh, do you think this could have been prevented?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I would have like fallen under the table.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think I think a lot of people during those days said to me, like, you are doing the best you can.
Yes.
You know, which I needed to hear. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention, because I was super proud of myself, that there was one day that I was like in the garden. I was just kind of like wandering around my garden crying. I was very sad. And I texted a friend and said something like, I'm having a hard week. And I'm wondering if you're around and would be willing to just hang out with me while I'm working in the yard. And I think that I was super proud of myself that I didn't just say, hey, want to come hang out?
Right.
That I put in there like, I'm having a hard week and I could use a buddy.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he cleared his calendar or if his calendar was already open or whatever, but he's like, I'll be right over. And I was just like, thank you.
Yeah.
You know, and when he got there, he wasn't like, what's going on? You know, he just was sort of like had space for all of that. But again, I was proud of myself that I didn't just casually say like, hey, want to hang out in the garden? Because he might have been like, right. But that I named like, I need a buddy. And he was like, got it.
Yep.
Here I come. So I think that's the thing is like when a caregiver has the guts to say something like that, like do anything you can to show up. Don't be like, well, I was actually thinking. Nope.
Yep.
It took a lot of guts. And if you say no, then they likely won't bring it up again, you know? Yep. So, yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that in the coming weeks, there is less cause for you to feel exhausted and tired and overwhelmed and in this place.
Yep.
Yeah, I really hope that for you.
Thank you. And also, like, look at us, like, in what you and I have both gone through in the last few weeks. And
yeah,
it's go us, You know, I'm sorry that both of us had to do any of the things that we had to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And also we did our best.
Yeah.
You know, and we're doing our best. And so go us. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. It's good to process all this with you.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Always good to chat.
Yeah. All right. I'll see you later.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. You've been listening to In Sickness. Find us online at insickness.care or on Instagram at insicknesspodcast. You can send your questions and comments to insicknesspodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or fellow caregiver, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening, and take care.